Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The Toy of Terror.
I was excited to take my son, Ethan, to the newly opened toy store at the mall. I had fond memories of days spent surrounded by colorful displays and the joyful sounds of children's laughter, and I couldn't wait to share that experience with him. As we stepped through the entrance, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. The store was vibrant, filled with bright colors, and the air was thick with the sweet smell of new toys and freshly opened packaging. "Look, Mom!" Ethan exclaimed, pulling me toward a display of action figures. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and I couldn't help but smile. It was amazing to see him so thrilled. We wandered through the aisles, marveling at everything from plush toys to intricate building sets. I watched him dart from one shelf to the next, trying to absorb every single detail of this magical place. As we ventured deeper into the store, I noticed a peculiar doll tucked away in a corner. It had striking blue eyes that seemed almost lifelike and long, tangled hair that flowed down its back. There was something unsettling about it, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Ethan, come check this out," I called, hoping to distract him from the doll. But as I turned to grab him, I realized he was no longer beside me. A chill crept into my chest. "Ethan," I called, my voice quivering slightly. My heart raced as I scanned the aisles, calling his name over and over, but my words echoed back, swallowed by the bright chaos around me. The laughter of other children felt distant now, almost mocking in its normalcy. I dashed down one aisle, then another, searching desperately. "Ethan!" I shouted, my voice rising in panic. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, my mind racing with terrifying thoughts of where he could be. I imagined the worst. What if he had slipped away? What if he was scared? Just when I was about to lose hope, I spotted a store employee. "Excuse me, my son is missing. Have you seen him?" The employee's face paled as he nodded. "We'll help you look," he said, but I could see the worry in his eyes, matching the dread growing in my heart. Together, we scoured every aisle, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. With every second ticking by, my anxiety surged. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong, and deep down, I knew I had to find him before it was too late. Panic surged through me as I called Ethan's name, my voice tinged with desperation. Each time I shouted, the name echoed back, swallowed by the cheerful ambience of the toy store that felt increasingly ominous. I felt like I was in a nightmare, trapped in a place that was supposed to bring joy. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs as I sprinted through the aisles, my eyes scanning every nook and cranny, every colorful display. I turned down one aisle after another, each empty space amplifying my fear. "Ethan!" I called again, louder this time, but the only response was the distant laughter of children and the cheerful chatter of parents, blissfully unaware of my growing dread. I approached another employee, a young woman with a concerned expression. "I can't find my son. He's around 6, wearing a blue shirt. Please, you have to help me." She nodded quickly, her demeanor shifting from casual to alarmed. "I'll get someone to assist you right away," she said, and before I could respond, she was off, calling for the manager. I felt my stomach twist. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity. I pressed a trembling hand to my forehead, trying to quell the rising tide of panic. After what felt like hours, the store manager arrived, flanked by several employees. "We're launching a search," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his concern. They started combing through the aisles, calling Ethan's name, while I felt rooted in place, my heart racing. I could hardly breathe, the worry clawing at my throat. What if he's hurt? What if he's scared? As I waited, the walls of the store seemed to close in around me. I glanced at the shelves, the cheerful toys now feeling eerie in their innocence. I thought about how easily a child could get lost in a place like this. After what seemed like an eternity, I decided to venture further into the store, convinced that I might find him in a more secluded area. I pushed past the brightly colored displays, my heart pounding harder with each step. Suddenly, I spotted a familiar blue shirt peeking out from behind a curtain at the back of the store. "Ethan!" I shouted, running toward it, hope igniting within me. But as I approached, my heart sank. The space behind the curtain was empty. I could feel the world tilting beneath my feet. Where could he have gone? The store felt like a maze, each aisle twisting in on itself, trapping me in a cycle of panic. I started to retrace my steps, my mind racing with fears of what could happen to him, and dread clawed at my heart. I had to find him. I couldn't lose him. But where could he be? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket, a jarring interruption to my spiraling thoughts. I fumbled to pull it out, my heart racing with hope. Maybe it was Ethan. But when I saw the caller ID, I felt a mix of hope and dread. It was the toy store. My hands trembled as I answered the call, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. "Is this Ethan's mother?" A calm voice on the other end asked. My heart leaped at the mention of my son's name. "Yes. Is he okay? Where is he?" I pressed, barely able to contain the urgency in my tone. The voice hesitated, and my stomach twisted into knots. "We found a child matching his description," the voice continued, but my relief was short-lived. "However, you need to come to the back entrance of the store. We're closing for the day." "What do you mean, closing?" I asked, confusion flooding my mind. "Why can't I just go to the front?" "We just need you to come around back," the voice replied, a hint of urgency creeping in. It's complicated. Complicated." I echoed, dread filling me. "What do you mean? Is my son hurt?" "No, he's fine. Just, please come to the back," the voice insisted. The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing there, bewildered and increasingly uneasy. I glanced around the store, my heart racing once more. I felt a primal instinct urging me to run toward the back entrance. I pushed through the aisles again, my heart racing. The bright colors of the toys around me felt dull and menacing now. I turned a corner and spotted the employee who had helped earlier, her face pale and tense as she whispered to another staff member. They looked up as I approached, and I felt the air grow heavier with unspoken words. "I got a call about my son. Where do I go?" I urged, trying to keep the panic from my voice. The employee pointed toward a door at the far end of the store, marked with a small sign that read "Employees Only." I hurried over, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I pushed open the door and found myself in a narrow hallway, dimly lit and filled with a strange silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My footsteps echoed as I made my way down the corridor, each step amplifying my fear. As I neared the back entrance, I spotted a flickering fluorescent light overhead. I glanced around, the unsettling quiet wrapping around me like a shroud. Suddenly, I heard a soft, echoing laugh. It was Ethan's laugh. My heart leaped with hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a creeping dread. I rushed toward the sound, but as I turned the corner, my breath caught in my throat. The back entrance was dark and empty, the only sound the faint hum of the flickering light. "Ethan," I called, my voice trembling. "Where are you?" No answer came, just the oppressive silence that followed my words. I felt a chill run down my spine, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. Something was wrong, and I could feel it deep in my bones. I turned back, feeling an overwhelming urge to escape this place, but just as I did, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. There, at the edge of the hallway, stood a shadowy figure, its features obscured in the dim light. My heart raced, and fear gripped me as the figure began to move, inching closer. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. But as I stepped forward, the figure vanished, dissolving into the darkness. I was left alone, standing in the eerie silence, dread pooling in my stomach. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't abandon my search for Ethan. I had to find him before it was too late. Panic surged through me as I stepped into the dark hallway, my heart racing and a cold sweat coating my skin. The flickering light overhead cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls, and I could feel the oppressive silence wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I called out for Ethan again, my voice echoing into the void, but all that returned was the unsettling sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the desperate need to find my son. "Ethan," I shouted once more, desperation lacing my words. The darkness felt alive, whispering secrets I couldn't grasp. The shadow I had seen lingered in my mind, gnawing at my nerves. Who, or what, had I just seen? I crept further down the hallway, each step filled with trepidation. The walls were lined with faded posters of toys and cheerful slogans that now felt mockingly out of place. As I reached the end of the corridor, I spotted a door slightly ajar, a dim light seeping through the crack. My breath hitched in my throat, but I pushed the door open, driven by an overwhelming need to discover what lay inside. The room beyond was cluttered and disheveled, filled with discarded toys and boxes piled high. It smelled musty, as if it hadn't been opened in years. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of Ethan. "Ethan, are you here?" I called, my voice trembling. Then I heard it again, the faint sound of laughter. This time it was different, echoing in a way that sent chills down my spine. It felt wrong, distorted, as if something sinister lurked behind the innocent sound. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I instinctively stepped further into the room. My heart dropped when I saw a large old toy chest in the corner, half open and beckoning me closer. Against my better judgment, I approached it. The laughter grew louder, mingling with the heavy silence around me. I gripped the edge of the chest, my pulse quickening. Should I look inside? I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder as if expecting something to jump out at me. But the hallway remained still, the shadows pooling in the corners. I took a deep breath and threw open the lid. Inside, a jumble of toys lay scattered, dolls with cracked porcelain faces, action figures missing limbs, and stuffed animals with matted fur. But at the bottom, something caught my eye. A small blue shirt, Ethan's shirt. My heart raced as I reached for it, a mix of hope and dread flooding my veins. "Ethan," I cried, pulling the shirt from the depths of the chest. As I held it in my hands, the laughter stopped abruptly. The silence felt deafening, and a chill crept through the room. My gut twisted, an unsettling feeling prickling at the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. I whipped around, panic clawing at my throat as I fumbled for the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. No, no, no! I screamed, pounding against the door with my fists. My breath came in short gasps, and I felt the walls closing in around me. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft and sinister, slithering through the air. "He's not here," the voice echoed, chilling me to the bone. I froze, fear coursing through me as I strained to listen. "He's mine now." The laughter returned, but this time it was haunting and twisted. I felt my blood run cold as I realized the truth. I was not just looking for my son. I was trespassing in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I needed to find Ethan and get out of this hellish place before it swallowed me whole. Panic surged within me as I slammed my fists against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whisper lingered in the air, its chilling words echoing in my mind. "He's mine now." I felt a primal urge to escape, to run as far away as I could from this suffocating darkness. But where was Ethan? I couldn't abandon him, not now. I stumbled backward, desperate to find a way out. My heart pounded, drowning out the silence, and I could feel the walls of the room pressing in on me. In a moment of sheer determination, I turned and scanned the room for any other exit. The window! I dashed toward it, the dim light barely illuminating my path. As I reached the window, I threw back the curtains, hoping to see the familiar sights of the shopping mall outside. Instead, I was met with an inky void, a thick darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. Fear clawed at my throat as I realized that I was utterly trapped in this forgotten corner of the world. Suddenly, I heard movement behind me. I whirled around, my heart racing, and froze as I saw a figure emerge from the shadows. The air felt electric, charged with a malevolence that made my skin crawl. The figure stepped forward, its features becoming clearer in the dim light. It was a woman, her expression twisted in a sickening smile. "Looking for someone?" she asked, her voice sweet but laced with something sinister. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Where's my son?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Oh, he's here," she replied, her grin widening. "He's playing with the others." My stomach twisted in horror at the implication. "What do you mean, the others?" I pressed, my voice shaking. "Children like him," she said, tilting her head as if considering me. "They all come to play, and I make sure they never leave. They're much happier here." A wave of nausea washed over me as her words sank in. "You're lying!" I shouted, the realization hitting me like a blow. "Where is my son?" The woman's laughter echoed around me, a sound devoid of joy. "He's in a better place now, just like the rest." With that, she gestured toward the darkness behind her, and my blood ran cold as I caught a glimpse of small shapes moving in the shadows. Children's laughter filled the air, but it was distorted and hollow, sending shivers down my spine. "Ethan!" I screamed, desperation flooding my voice as I fought against the suffocating dread. I lunged forward, but the woman stepped in my path, blocking my way. "You can't have him," she hissed, her smile fading to a menacing glare. "No!" I yelled, shoving past her, my heart racing as I plunged into the darkness. I could hear the laughter grow louder, mingling with my frantic heartbeat. "Ethan!" I called out again, my voice raw with panic. Then, in the depths of the shadows, I saw him, Ethan, standing alone, his small frame illuminated by an otherworldly glow. "Mommy!" he cried, reaching out to me. Relief washed over me, but before I could move, the figure of the woman appeared between us, her expression one of fury. "No, you can't take him!" she screamed, her voice echoing like a banshee. I felt the air shift, a force pushing against me, and I fought to reach Ethan. "Ethan, come to me!" The darkness closed in, wrapping around us, and I could feel my strength waning. Just as I felt myself being pulled back, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I reached deep inside, summoning every ounce of love and determination. "I won't let you take him!" I screamed, pushing past the dark energy that sought to keep me away. In that moment, the shadows around Ethan seemed to recoil, and I saw his eyes widen with recognition. "Mommy!" he shouted, and in an instant, I felt an invisible thread between us snap into place. With every ounce of strength, I lunged forward, wrapping my arms around him. The darkness erupted around us, and I felt a fierce wind swirling, pulling us back toward the light. I heard the woman scream, her voice twisted with rage and despair. "You can't escape!" But I held on to Ethan, refusing to let go as the light enveloped us. Together, we shot through the void, and I felt the warmth of the shopping mall flood over us. We stumbled out of the shadows and into the main store, breathless and disoriented. The familiar sounds of the mall filled my ears, the chatter of shoppers, the hum of the escalators, but my heart still raced. I looked down at Ethan, who was clutching my hand, his eyes wide with confusion. "Mommy, what happened?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt beside him, my heart still pounding as I pulled him into a tight embrace. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. "You're safe now." But as I looked back toward the shadows, the darkness seemed to linger, a sinister reminder of what we had escaped. I knew that whatever had dwelled there was still waiting, still watching. I would never forget what had happened, and I would always be on guard, for the darkness had shown me that it could reach out again, pulling unsuspecting souls into its abyss. We turned and walked toward the exit, hand in hand, leaving behind the store that had turned into a nightmare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the horrors we had encountered were far from over. The memory of that woman's chilling laughter would haunt me forever.
The last elevator.
It was just supposed to be another regular night. Working the night shift as a janitor at the mall had its perks: peace and quiet, no crowds, and plenty of time to get the job done. But it also came with its fair share of unsettling moments. The flickering lights, the hollow echo of my footsteps through the empty corridors, and that odd feeling that maybe I wasn't completely alone. I always tried to ignore it, chalked it up to my imagination, or just the weird energy of an empty shopping mall at night. That evening, after finishing up in the food court, I was wrapping up my shift. My back ached, and my mind was already on autopilot, just counting the minutes until I could clock out. I needed to put away my cleaning supplies, so I decided to take the elevator down to the basement. Nothing unusual about it. I'd done it hundreds of times before. I loaded my cart into the elevator and hit the button for the basement. The doors slid shut with a soft click, and I leaned against the wall, exhausted. The elevator shuddered to life, descending slowly, the soft hum of the machinery almost soothing. But then, something changed. The ride wasn't smooth anymore. It jolted, like the elevator was hitting some kind of snag. At first, I didn't think much of it. Old building, old elevator. These things happen, right? But then it kept going. past the basement. I frowned, looking at the panel. The lights that indicated the floors flickered, then vanished completely. The elevator wasn't stopping. It kept descending deeper and deeper, farther than I thought the mall even had space for. My stomach dropped as the air in the elevator grew colder, heavier. I hit the button for the main floor, but nothing happened. I tried again, pressing it harder this time, but the elevator didn't respond. The silence in the air felt different now, oppressive, thick, as if the walls were closing in on me. I could feel a strange pressure in my chest, like the air itself was growing denser. The lights flickered, once, twice, before dimming to a dull yellow. Finally, with a jarring thud, the elevator stopped. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the rising panic. The doors slid open, and I stepped out, expecting to find the familiar, cluttered basement storage area. But what greeted me wasn't the basement at all. It was something else. The space beyond the elevator was vast and dimly lit, stretching out farther than any part of the mall I'd ever seen. The air smelled musty, like damp concrete left to rot. The walls were lined with old, abandoned store displays, things I'd never seen before, covered in thick layers of dust. Everything looked ancient, forgotten, like this part of the mall had been sealed off for decades. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a hesitant step forward. This wasn't right. This place shouldn't exist. It was like stepping into a part of the building that had been erased from memory, hidden beneath the surface. I looked back at the elevator, the open doors inviting me to retreat, but something pulled me further into the unknown. I couldn't explain it, a mix of curiosity and dread that I couldn't shake. The lights overhead flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound bouncing off the walls, too loud for the space. As I walked deeper into the forgotten level, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't alone down here. With every step deeper into the darkness, a primal instinct whispered at the back of my mind. Asterisk asterisk, get out asterisk asterisk. But I couldn't turn back now. It was as if the air around me was charged with an invisible energy, pulling me further in, drawing me towards something I couldn't yet see. As I ventured into the desolate corridor, I noticed more remnants of the past. Store signs hung crookedly on the walls, their once vibrant colors faded to ghostly shades. I could make out names I'd never heard of, places that seemed to have existed long before the mall had been built. A chill crept through me, each sign telling a silent story of abandonment and neglect. I turned a corner and stumbled upon a door slightly ajar, the metal frame rusted and splintered. My heart raced as I pushed it open, the creaking sound echoing through the air. Inside, I found what looked like a stockroom, shelves piled high with old merchandise that had long since gathered dust. There were boxes labeled with strange, unfamiliar brands, and mannequins in tattered clothing stood silently in the corners, their glassy eyes staring back at me. I stepped further in, curiosity overcoming my fear. As I picked up a dusty box, the weight of it felt strange, almost ominous. I opened it cautiously, revealing a collection of vintage clothing, dresses that looked like they belonged to another era. But it wasn't the clothing that caught my attention. It was the scent. It was sweet and rotten, like something that had been left to decay for years. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a faint rustling from behind one of the shelves. My heart leapt into my throat. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling in the oppressive darkness. There was no response, only the unsettling echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. I took a step back, my pulse quickening. What was I doing here? I didn't belong in this place. I turned to leave, but before I could, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow darting between the shelves. Panic surged through me as I backed away, my heart pounding like a war drum. I could hear my breath quickening, each inhale becoming more frantic. I took another step back, then another, until I was at the door, desperately wanting to flee. But as I turned to escape, I felt it, a presence behind me, heavy and watching. The air shifted, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. I knew I wasn't alone. "Who's there?" I shouted, forcing myself to sound braver than I felt. But only silence answered me. Summoning my courage, I turned slowly, scanning the dimly lit room. The shadows danced along the walls, making it impossible to discern what was real and what was merely a trick of the light. I squinted, trying to catch any movement, but all I saw were the lifeless mannequins standing still, their expressions eerily blank. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a fleeting glimpse, a figure darting past the doorway, a flicker of movement too quick to be defined. My breath hitched in my throat, and I was overwhelmed by a primal urge to run. But before I could make my escape, I heard it again, a soft whisper that seemed to curl around me, sending ice through my veins. "Help me!" It was a child's voice, faint and pleading, echoing from the shadows. My heart raced as I hesitated, torn between the desire to flee and the urge to investigate. The whisper tugged at something deep inside me, a mix of dread and compassion. I could feel my rational thoughts slipping away, replaced by an instinct that screamed at me to find the source of that voice. "Help me!" The words echoed again, drawing me in, deeper into the darkness of the forgotten stockroom. I took a shaky step forward, compelled by an unknown force, even as every instinct told me to turn back. I was about to find out what secrets this forsaken place held, and whether I would be able to escape its grasp. I stood frozen, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The voice echoed in my ears, wrapping around my mind like a vine. "Help me!" It was soft and desperate, almost melodic, and it felt too real to ignore. I knew I should turn around and flee, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was calling for me. With my breath caught in my throat, I edged closer to the sound, stepping cautiously through the cluttered room. The air grew colder, a biting chill that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I felt as if I was being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing but the eerie stillness of the abandoned stockroom. "Where are you?" I called out, my voice trembling as it sliced through the silence. "Are you okay?" I had no idea what compelled me to ask that question, but it slipped out before I could stop myself. For a moment, there was silence, and then the voice returned, clearer this time, but still hauntingly soft. "In here. Please." My pulse raced. I followed the sound, stepping over discarded clothing and broken shelves. The room felt like a labyrinth, twisting and turning in ways that made me doubt my sense of direction. I was filled with a mix of fear and determination. I had to find this child. I had to help, even if every bone in my body screamed for me to turn back. As I moved deeper into the stockroom, I came across a narrow hallway, barely lit by flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I felt drawn to it, the whisper guiding me forward. This way, it seemed to beckon, luring me into the unknown. I stepped into the hallway, the walls closing in around me. The whisper grew louder, more urgent, and I could feel a strange pull in my chest, a compulsion to keep moving forward. It felt like a game of hide and seek, only I wasn't sure who I was seeking or what would happen if I found them. At the end of the hallway, I found another door, old and worn, barely hanging on its hinges. I pushed it open, and the whisper came flooding out like a rush of air. "Thank you. Please, help me." The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. The air was thick with a musty odor, as if time had forgotten this place. I stepped inside, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. As I scanned the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in the corner, was a small figure, no taller than a child, huddled beneath a tattered blanket. My breath caught in my throat. Was this real? Was I really seeing what I thought I was seeing? "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering. "Are you okay?" The figure turned slowly, and I gasped as a pale face emerged from the shadows. The child looked fragile, with wide, frightened eyes that seemed to reflect the dim light. But there was something wrong, something unsettling about the way the child stared at me. There was a depth in those eyes, a sadness that reached far beyond their years. "Help me," the child repeated, extending a hand toward me, fingers trembling. I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me, but then a cold chill crept back into my thoughts. This place, this child, it all felt wrong. "Where are your parents?" I asked, instinctively stepping closer, but I stopped short when I saw the child's expression shift, darkening in a way that made my heart race with fear. Not here," the child whispered, the voice now chillingly hollow. "They can't find me. Don't let them find me." A wave of confusion crashed over me. "Who?" I asked, glancing around the room as if expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "Who can't find you?" But before I could get an answer, the temperature dropped even further. The air grew heavy and thick, and suddenly the lights flickered wildly. The child shrank back, eyes wide with terror. "They're coming!" Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, and the room plunged into darkness. My heart raced, and panic surged through me. I turned to pound on the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. I spun back to the child, who was now backing away into the shadows. "Please," I yelled, desperation spilling out of my voice. "What's happening? What do you mean they're coming?" The child's face contorted with fear, and as I reached out to comfort them, something in the darkness stirred. A low growl emanated from the shadows, sending shivers down my spine. In that moment, I realized I was no longer in control. Something was watching us from the dark corners of the room, and I had stumbled into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The growl reverberated through the room, a low, menacing sound that sent chills racing down my spine. I felt paralyzed, torn between the instinct to flee and the overwhelming need to protect the child huddled in the shadows. "What is it?" I shouted, my voice shaking as I strained to see through the darkness. "What's coming?" The child didn't answer, only pressed themselves against the wall, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I took a step closer, desperate to reach them. "We need to get out of here," I urged, but as I moved, the darkness seemed to close in around us, swallowing the light from the flickering bulbs overhead. The growl intensified, echoing off the walls, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "Please, tell me what to do," I pleaded, my heart racing. I had to keep the child safe. Then, through the thick veil of shadows, I caught a glimpse of movement. A shape, tall and indistinct, emerged from the darkness. I squinted, my breath hitching in my throat. The figure was shrouded in shadows, but I could feel its presence, heavy and suffocating. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice hissed, low and chilling, sending a jolt of terror through my veins. The child gasped, their small frame trembling. "Don't listen to it," they cried out, eyes wide with fear. "Run!" Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, a rush of darkness that engulfed the room. I stumbled back, heart pounding as I grasped for the door, but it remained firmly shut. The child was still behind me, and I couldn't leave them. Not now. I turned to face the figure, forcing myself to stand tall despite the terror threatening to paralyze me. "What do you want?" I shouted, trying to mask my fear with bravado. "Who are you?" The figure stepped closer, and I could finally make out its features. It was a woman, her face gaunt and hollow, eyes sunken and dark. Her hair hung in tangled strands around her shoulders, and her mouth twisted into a sinister smile. "I want what you took from me," she whispered, her voice a raspy hiss that sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean?" I asked, backing away slowly, glancing back at the child who was still huddled against the wall, their eyes wide with horror. "The child belongs to me," the woman said, her gaze locking onto mine, a predatory glint in her eyes. "You shouldn't have come here. You're not supposed to be here." Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. I had stumbled into a nightmare, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead had blurred. The child wasn't lost. They were trapped. "What happened to you?" I demanded, trying to grasp the situation. "I was forgotten," she whispered, her voice laced with anguish. "Left behind when the world moved on. Just like him." My heart sank as I glanced at the child, who now looked more terrified than ever. "What do you want with them?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. The woman's expression darkened, her smile fading into a scowl. "He belongs to me," she hissed, stepping closer, her presence suffocating. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed to keep him here." In that moment, the child screamed, a sound so piercing it reverberated through the room. "Run!" they cried, scrambling to their feet. But before I could even react, the woman lunged forward, her fingers stretching toward the child. "No!" I shouted, throwing myself between them, my instincts taking over. I could feel the weight of her darkness pressing against me, but I couldn't let her take the child. "You can't have them." The air crackled with energy as I stood firm, willing myself to be a barrier between the child and the entity that loomed before us. "You can't keep them here. They deserve to be free." The woman paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her hollow features. "Free," she echoed, her voice low and menacing. "They cannot be free. They are mine, just like I am bound to this place." I felt a rush of determination surge through me. "No, you're not going to take them. I'll find a way to help them escape." My voice wavered, but I stood my ground. The darkness seemed to pulse around us, the air thick with malevolence. The woman's expression twisted in fury. "You have no idea what you're facing. You will regret this." I took a deep breath, knowing I had to act fast. "We need to go now," I shouted to the child, my voice steadying. "Follow me." With that, I turned and bolted toward the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear the woman's enraged scream behind me, but I didn't look back. I had to protect the child at all costs. We were in a race against time, and the darkness was closing in. I raced toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I felt the oppressive weight of the woman's fury behind us. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, but I didn't stop to think about what lay ahead. All that mattered was getting the child out of that nightmarish place. "Stay close," I shouted, glancing back to make sure they were following. The fear in their eyes was palpable, and it spurred me on even faster. We had to get out. The heavy darkness seemed to reach for us, but I pressed forward, focusing on the door at the end of the corridor. I slammed into the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose within me as I shoved against it with all my strength. "Come on, come on!" I yelled, my voice strained. The child was just behind me, and I could sense the woman's presence closing in, an angry force that threatened to consume us both. Just as despair began to creep in, I heard the door creak. "Push!" I cried out, and the child rushed to my side, their small frame pressing against the door as we heaved together. With one final shove, it burst open, and we stumbled out into the bright, sterile hallway of the shopping mall. The sudden light felt like a burst of freedom, and I pulled the child close to me, shielding them from the shadows that lingered at the edges of the doorway. But the safety was short-lived. I could hear the echo of the woman's voice behind us, a chilling reminder that we were not yet free. "Get to the main entrance," I urged, grabbing the child's hand and sprinting down the hall. The mall was eerily quiet, the sounds of shoppers and laughter muted as if the world outside had faded away. I glanced back, half expecting the woman to emerge from the darkness, but there was only silence. "Why is it so quiet?" the child whispered, their voice trembling. "I don't know, but we have to keep moving," I replied, pushing down the rising panic in my chest. The exit was just ahead, a beacon of hope against the encroaching shadows. We rushed toward it, but as we neared, I felt an icy chill wash over me. The doors swung shut, locking us inside. "No, please," I shouted, banging against the glass, desperation clawing at my throat. "Let us out." But the doors remained unyielding, trapping us in the suffocating darkness of the mall. I turned to the child, who was shaking beside me. "We can't stay here. We need to find another way." Their wide eyes mirrored my fear, but I couldn't let it consume us. We had come too far to turn back now. I scanned the area, my mind racing. There had to be another exit. I noticed a service door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway, the flicker of lights within revealing a maintenance area. "This way," I yelled, pulling the child along as we sprinted toward the door. As we entered, the sound of the woman's voice echoed in the distance, distorted and angry. "You can't escape me," she shrieked, the walls vibrating with her fury. My heart raced as I led the child deeper into the maintenance area, dodging equipment and debris. "Stay behind me," I ordered, trying to sound braver than I felt. We moved cautiously through the maze of shadows, the faint sound of her footsteps growing closer. We reached a narrow corridor lined with dimly lit exits. "There has to be a way out," I said, panic creeping back in. "This way." I gestured toward a doorway that led to the loading dock, hoping it would lead us back outside. As I pushed the door open, a blast of cold air greeted us, but before we could step through, the woman's figure loomed in the shadows, blocking our escape. "You think you can leave? You belong to me now," she hissed, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. In that moment, something snapped within me. I couldn't let her take the child. "No, you don't control us," I shouted, stepping forward. "We are not yours." My voice rang out with a fierce determination I didn't know I had. The woman hesitated, her expression flickering with confusion. Seizing the moment, I grabbed the child's hand and bolted through the doorway, the cold air rushing past us as we emerged into the loading dock. We stumbled out into the night, the stars twinkling above us, a stark contrast to the horrors we had just escaped. We were outside, free from the shadows of the mall, but I could still feel the weight of the woman's rage behind us. "Keep running," I urged, and we sprinted toward the parking lot, the lights of the cars glowing like fireflies. As we reached the edge of the lot, I turned to look back, heart racing. The mall stood ominously in the darkness, a silent sentinel. We had made it out, but I knew the woman would not stop. I had to protect the child, to ensure they would never have to face that darkness again. "We need to find help," I said, breathing heavily, determination flooding my veins. With the stars guiding us, we ran toward the nearest street, leaving behind the haunted mall and the echoes of its horrors. But deep inside, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. The darkness would always linger, waiting for the next moment of weakness to strike. But for now, we were free. For now, we had survived.
The clothing test.
It started out as such a simple day. I had no idea how wrong it would turn. I was just looking for a new dress, something for my friend's birthday party next weekend. The weather was nice, not too cold, and the mall was buzzing with people, just the usual. Nothing seemed out of place, until I walked into that store. I had been to this mall 100 times, but this store was new. Or maybe I had just never noticed it before. It didn't have any flashy signs or decorations like the other stores. It was quiet, almost sterile, and the lighting was dim, giving it a strange atmosphere. Still, I shrugged it off. After all, how creepy could a store selling dresses really be? The racks were filled with beautiful clothes, more stylish than I expected. I browsed for a while, flipping through the dresses, feeling the fabrics. As I moved deeper into the store, a strange feeling started to creep up my spine. It was that unsettling sensation you get when you think someone's watching you, but I didn't see anyone around. I was alone, or so it seemed. Maybe it was just my imagination. The store was quiet. Too quiet, actually. No music playing, no chattering customers, nothing but the soft hum of the lights. I shook my head, trying to brush off the uneasiness. I had come to find a dress, not freak myself out. I grabbed a few options and made my way to the fitting rooms. There were 3 booths, all empty, with thick velvet curtains that hung heavy in the still air. I chose the one on the far left, pulling the curtains shut behind me. The space was small but clean, the mirror standing tall on the opposite wall. I slipped into the first dress. It was nice, but not really my style. I twisted in front of the mirror, checking out the fit. That's when I noticed it. Something off in the reflection. The lighting seemed wrong, almost darker. The corners of the room in the mirror looked more shadowed than they should have been. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the shadows didn't go away. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling was growing, like an itch in the back of my mind. As I stared into the mirror, something in the reflection shifted. Just for a second, I thought I saw movement behind me, like someone brushing past the curtain. I spun around, my heart racing. The booth was empty. The curtain hung still. I let out a nervous laugh, embarrassed at how jumpy I was being. I was alone. Of course I was. No one was there. But when I turned back to the mirror, my blood ran cold. For a split second, I saw it again. A figure, standing just behind the curtain, its shape barely visible in the shadows. I blinked, my eyes searching the reflection. It was gone. Or maybe it had never been there in the first place. Was I imagining things? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the mirror, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. There was no one else here, no movement, no figure behind the curtain. I was being ridiculous. Maybe the dim lighting was playing tricks on my eyes. Or maybe I was just tired. Yeah, that had to be it. Still, my heart wouldn't stop racing. I exhaled deeply, forcing myself to relax. It's just a dress, I thought, trying to laugh it off. I took it off, feeling more annoyed with myself than scared at this point. I was letting my imagination get the better of me, and it was embarrassing. I grabbed the second dress, a simple black one, and started to put it on. As I pulled it over my head, I felt that weird sensation again, like someone was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my skin prickled. My hands froze midway through adjusting the dress. I didn't want to, but I had to look. Slowly, I turned toward the mirror again. At first, everything seemed normal. My reflection was standing there, the dress half-zipped, my hair a little messy from the change. But as I adjusted the dress, something in the reflection caught my eye again, a flicker of movement just behind me. I didn't spin around this time. I forced myself to stay calm, but my eyes were glued to the mirror. And then I saw it, a shadow, barely noticeable at first, slipping from behind a curtain in the reflection. It was slow, almost deliberate, as if it knew I was watching. My heart pounded in my chest as the shadowy figure grew more defined. It was tall, its outline dark and vague, but definitely there. I could feel its presence, cold and looming. I was frozen in place, staring at the reflection, waiting for it to move again. I told myself it couldn't be real. I wasn't seeing this. My mind was playing tricks on me, right? But the shadow didn't vanish this time. It lingered, almost as if it was aware I could see it now. With trembling hands, I slowly reached for the curtain, determined to prove to myself that I was alone. My breath came in shallow gasps as I gripped the fabric, hesitating. The reflection remained the same, the figure behind me, unmoving, waiting. I yanked the curtain open, heart in my throat. Nothing. No one was there. I stepped out of the fitting room, half expecting to see someone darting away, but the area was completely empty. I let out a shaky breath and laughed, a short, nervous laugh that sounded more like a sob. I must have been losing it. There was no way someone could have been in there without me hearing or seeing them. But when I stepped back into the fitting room, something stopped me in my tracks. My eyes went straight to the mirror, where the reflection of the fitting room was wrong. In the reflection, the curtain behind me was slightly parted, as if someone had been peeking in, but when I looked at the actual curtain, it was fully closed. My reflection wasn't matching reality. A chill crawled up my spine. I stared at the mirror, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense anymore. It was just a curtain, just a mirror. But why didn't they match? I moved the curtain myself, tugging it back and forth, watching my reflection mimic my movements. It was normal now. Everything was fine, wasn't it? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My reflection felt off, like there was something else, lurking just beneath the surface of the glass, watching me, waiting. Suddenly, I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. My mind was racing. I needed to leave, to get out of that fitting room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That thing, whatever I saw in the mirror, it felt too real, too close. Every instinct in my body was screaming for me to run, but I hesitated, caught in that eerie space between disbelief and terror. I reached for the dress I'd tossed aside earlier, hurriedly trying to change back into my own clothes. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip the dress back up. I glanced nervously at the mirror again, half expecting to see the shadowy figure behind me, but the reflection looked normal now. Too normal. I forced myself to calm down. "You're just tired," I muttered under my breath, as if saying it out loud would make it true. But even my voice sounded small and unconvincing. I slipped into my shoes, and just as I turned to leave the fitting room, something in the mirror caught my eye again. My reflection. It wasn't moving. I froze. I was standing there, staring at the mirror, but my reflection was still, completely still. I blinked, my heart slamming in my chest, but the reflection didn't blink with me. It was just standing there, watching me with wide, unblinking eyes. Cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck. I took a step forward, then another, my eyes glued to the mirror. My reflection still hadn't moved. I lifted my hand slowly, as if testing it. My real hand rose, but my reflection stayed at its side, motionless, staring straight at me. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was something else. Panic hit me full force, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the fitting room bench. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight, like the air was being sucked out of the room. I backed up until I hit the wall, my eyes never leaving the mirror. My reflection was just standing there, staring like it was waiting for something, waiting for me. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of movement behind it, behind her, as if something was shifting in the shadows again. But this time, I didn't want to look closer. I didn't want to know what was lurking back there. My reflection, or whatever it was, slowly began to smile. It was a slow, unnatural grin, stretching too wide, too wrong. My lips stayed pressed tight in fear, but hers twisted into a grotesque mockery of a smile. I felt the blood drain from my face as I watched, paralyzed with terror. Suddenly, she lifted her hand, the reflection that had been frozen moments before, and placed it against the glass. The skin of her hand looked pale, almost translucent, as if the barrier between us was thinning, as if she could step through at any moment. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the horrific image in front of me. Then, in one horrifying moment, she leaned forward, her face pressing against the glass, that terrible grin still plastered on her face. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with something far more malevolent than a simple reflection should hold. And then I heard it, a faint sound, barely audible at first but unmistakable. The rustling of the curtain behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see it move, but there was nothing. No one. Just the silent, heavy fabric. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was gone. The fitting room in the mirror was empty. And that's when I realized the rustling wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from the mirror. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. But the rustling, the faint, eerie rustling, it was unmistakable. It came from the mirror. I stood frozen, staring at the empty reflection of the fitting room, but my mind couldn't process what was happening. The reflection of the curtain was moving, shifting ever so slightly, but in the real world, everything was still. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, as if my fear had wrapped its cold hands around my neck, choking me into silence. I took a shaky step backward, my eyes locked on the mirror, terrified of what I might see next. And then it happened. The curtain in the mirror slowly parted, revealing a dark, shadowy figure, the same figure I had glimpsed before. But this time, it wasn't just a fleeting shadow. It was there, fully formed, standing in the reflection behind where I should have been. It was tall, much taller than me, and its shape was all wrong, too elongated, like it had been stretched beyond what was humanly possible. Its features were hidden in darkness, but I could feel its gaze, cold and invasive, as though it was seeing right through me. I backed up until I hit the wall again, my body trembling. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate, as the figure in the mirror stepped forward. It was coming closer, inching toward the glass, and my stomach twisted with the horrifying realization that it was no longer just inside the mirror. It was trying to come out. I gasped for air, my chest tight with panic. I had to get out of here. I had to move, but I couldn't seem to tear myself away from the mirror. The figure moved closer still, its hand reaching up toward the glass, just like my reflection had done moments before. The glass rippled, like water disturbed by a pebble, and I felt a cold draft of air brush against my skin, though the fitting room itself remained deathly still. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This isn't real." But it felt real. Too real. I could feel the icy presence of whatever that thing was. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me, but I forced myself to turn away from the mirror. I couldn't look at it anymore. I needed to get out. I grabbed the curtain and yanked it aside, desperate to leave the fitting room, but when I stepped out, the store wasn't the same. The space felt wrong. The once quiet and dimly lit store was now bathed in a strange, cold light, and everything looked distorted, as if I had stepped into a warped version of reality. I glanced around, expecting to see the other racks of clothes, the exit, anything familiar. But the store was different. The walls seemed to stretch out further than they should, and the mannequins, they were positioned in odd, twisted angles, their faces blank and smooth, but somehow staring at me, watching, like they knew I didn't belong here anymore. I turned in circles, trying to find the door I had come through, but it wasn't there. There were no exits, no way out. The fitting rooms behind me loomed large, dark, and ominous, like a gaping mouth waiting to swallow me whole. And the mirror. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, but I could feel it. I could feel it watching me from the other side. The rustling sound hadn't stopped. I could hear it louder now, and it wasn't just in the mirror anymore. It was all around me, like something was shifting in the walls, moving just out of sight. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched from every angle. Desperate, I ran toward the center of the store, but the floor seemed to stretch out endlessly in front of me. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that twisted and writhed like they were alive. The mannequins' heads seemed to turn ever so slightly as I passed them, though I knew they couldn't move. I kept telling myself that, but deep down, I didn't believe it. I was trapped. I was trapped. I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just fear or panic. It was something far worse. I was stuck in a nightmare, and every breath felt like it could be my last. My legs were trembling, my throat dry, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had to find a way out, any way out. I ran through the distorted aisles of the store, the flickering lights casting grotesque shadows that stretched and twisted with every step. The mannequins seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, their featureless faces turning just enough to suggest they were following my movements. Their blank eyes seemed to bore into me, cold and unfeeling, and the rustling, oh God, that rustling sound. It was everywhere now, as if the very air around me was alive with the movements of something unseen. I sprinted toward where I thought the entrance might be, but the store seemed to grow and change around me. It was like the walls were breathing, expanding and contracting, turning the space into a maze that I couldn't navigate. My heart pounded painfully in my chest, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. I had no idea where I was anymore. And then, the rustling stopped. For a brief moment, there was silence, total, suffocating silence. It should have been a relief, but the absence of sound made the terror even more palpable. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the store, waiting for whatever came next. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze brush the back of my neck. Slowly, I turned around, my pulse hammering in my ears, and my blood ran cold. The mirror. It had followed me. The fitting room mirror stood right behind me, though I had left it behind in the back of the store. It shouldn't have been there, but there it was, tall, dark, and ominous. The glass shimmered unnaturally, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a ripple. And then I saw it. The figure. It was back, standing in the reflection, staring straight at me. This time, there was no mistake. It wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a person, or something that resembled a person. Tall, thin, with distorted limbs and a face obscured by shadows. But I could feel its eyes, cold and malevolent, locked onto mine. My reflection didn't move. It just stood there, staring back at me, the figure looming behind it like a predator waiting to strike. My legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get away from that mirror. Whatever was on the other side, it wasn't me, it was something much darker, something that wanted to take my place. I took a shaky step back, but the figure in the mirror moved closer. The glass rippled again, and I saw its hand slowly reach out, pressing against the surface of the mirror. The reflection flickered, the image distorting as if the boundary between our worlds was thinning, and the figure. It was trying to cross over. "No," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But it was. I could feel it. I stumbled backward, my body moving on instinct, my mind barely able to keep up. The figure's hand pressed harder against the glass, and I could hear the faint sound of the mirror creaking, groaning under the pressure. It was pushing through. I could feel it. I turned to run, but my foot caught on something, a mannequin's arm, and I crashed to the ground. Pain shot through my ankle, and I cried out, scrambling to get back on my feet. When I glanced up, the figure was nearly out of the mirror, its body distorting as it pushed through the glass like it was made of liquid. It stepped out. It was here. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the cold, hard floor, as the figure fully emerged from the mirror. Its face was still shrouded in shadows, but I could see the twisted, elongated limbs, the unnatural way it moved, like it didn't belong in this world. And then it smiled. That same grotesque, inhuman smile I had seen in my reflection earlier. But this time, it wasn't behind the glass. It was standing right in front of me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was paralyzed with fear as the figure slowly reached down, its cold, shadowy hand extending toward me. I could feel the temperature drop, a chill that pierced my bones. In that moment, I knew what it wanted. It wasn't just here to scare me. It wanted me, it wanted to take my place. I shut my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, when suddenly, the rustling stopped. Silence. I opened my eyes. The figure was gone. The mirror was gone. The store looked normal again. I was sitting in the middle of the fitting room floor, panting, drenched in sweat. My ankle throbbed with pain, but everything else was normal. The lights were no longer flickering. The mannequins stood still, lifeless, as they should be. The mirror was back where it belonged, unremarkable, just a regular piece of glass. I stood up slowly, wincing as I put weight on my ankle. Had it all been in my head? Some kind of hallucination? I didn't want to find out. I limped toward the exit, desperate to leave that cursed store behind me. But as I reached the door, I glanced at the mirror one last time. For just a split second, I saw it, the figure, standing in the reflection, smiling. And this time, it waved. I never went back.